biggest challenge for us was, number one, being able to get the resources there in a timely manner, as well as the safety of the folks who were on scene. The shooters were obviously at the scene. We didn't know where they were, and all personnel safety was a huge factor for us.
Very similar. Accountability would be a huge thing, that making sure we knew where everyone was at every time, and then obtaining those resources, knowing who was coming in. I called over to Dave immediately on scene to find out what ambulances were coming, what we should be expecting the numbers, and when we should be expecting them to arrive.
We were on scene at the triage area when we got the word that there were explosive devices in the building and possibly around the building. So we had to relocate the triage area to a location probably about a half a mile away, because we didn't know what explosives were around and how close they were. And so for personnel safety, we did relocate.
As they were relocating down to the other station, there was a crew and myself that stayed on scene. We worked with the other bystanders and victims that were still there. And during that time, we came across some statements on our Twitter account. As I explained it, it was in Islamic writing. Couldn't really tell who it was from, with just pictures of carnage, different types of pictures that you would see from overseas, and then statements that were taunting us, almost as a "we got you, look what we did" type thing. We immediately took those over to Homeland Security and turned them into that, and they increased our force protection at every station and locked down the stations. When I arrived on scene initially, I was informed that the suspects were no longer an issue. They weren't a threat, and they had been taken care of. And as time went on, within a few minutes, we found out and were notified that they had actually fled the scene, and they were still at large. And so that changed everything. Immediately, we're looking around on where's our force protection, where are entry points, are we safe to care for the patients where we're at, or do we need to relocate? And then later learning about like he had mentioned, the suspicious package, and having to think that, what is the radius, what type of package or what type of IED did they build, and what is that blast radius, where would we be safe at?
It's an emotional thing when you think that you are there to help somebody. You've been trained to go out and help people, and you want to do the very best that you can. And to know that somebody's out there and wants to hurt you potentially, it's kind of a sick feeling, but we have to go and do what we were trained to do nevertheless. So situational awareness is a big key going forward, understanding what we're walking into and be very aware of the scene.
It took us a while to get a little bit more information, but as we found out from cell phone tracking that they had continuously drove right back around to the IRC area within 5-6 different times, we wonder why. Why were they there? Were they checking out the scene to see what they had done? Were they there to try and harm us as well, to detonate the IED? What was the purpose? And that sits with you for a long time. And I mean, we're 10 months into this, and it still is a scary thought of knowing that we're there to help somebody, and then there's people out there wanting to harm us. We identified a lot of lessons learned, obviously. One of them was that force protection. I kind of crack a joke about it, on how police arrived on scene, and like a Twister game, they pulled their cars in various directions and left them idling there. And fire, we pulled in and very disciplined, lined up along the outside of the scene, which is what they typically do and what they're used to. And otherwise, what we should have done is use those apparatus as a barricade around us. One, to protect the patients that were there for their privacy from the media, and two, also to protect us for any outside source or any secondary attack. So that's one that we really noticed. One that I'd say we did well, that I would suggest to everybody, and I talk a lot about, is pre-designating those assignments. As we were en route and driving down, our incident commander immediately told us which engine was going to be doing triage, treatment, transport. And so we had that few minutes to get in our mindset what needed to happen, what our objectives were, and it wasn't a scramble on scene. The chaos that could have occurred was very, very calm and controlled at that time. Those are probably the biggest two that I would say and spread on.
A couple of things that worked really well for us is we had the AMR crews who came in, and when they arrived on the scene, we had them pull up, and they pulled all of the supplies out of the back of the ambulance into a little cache area. So once they dropped their supplies, they then moved forward with the ambulances and were staged and ready to load patients as they were available for transport. So that worked out really well. Pulling up, removing the supplies into the staging area, and then waiting for a patient. The other thing that worked really well that was new for me was doing the chevron staging while at the triage area, where we're backing in the vehicles at an angle rather than parking them straight along the street or at a 90-degree angle. So we were able to put more resources in a smaller area, and that worked really well.
Well, we say why we're out here is training. Absolutely. We're not here for the eyes on us. We're here as representatives of both of our departments and all the other departments that were there. For one, for the victims and the families and the survivors, and two, for training. You're going to have different types of incidents. No two active shooter incident is going to be the same. The profiling for the location, the victims, the suspects are always going to be different. So training and trying different things, not using one tool in the toolbox, but looking at different types of tools that are out there and incorporating them constantly in that training so you're up to date on ICS, start triage, the equipment, being very aware of the equipment, and knowing that things are going to change halfway through the incident, and now you're going to have to deal with that as well.
Now that we're in the reality of using the term active shooter, I think people need to understand that they cannot be in a position to think it's not going to happen to them. We didn't think it was going to happen to us, and it did. It's not something you sit and you dwell on, but it's something that you better be prepared for. So training is very important, and do the best you can to be prepared for incidents like this, because at some point, chances are it's going to happen.
And then I'd say for the aftermath is taking care of yourself and taking care of your employees as well. Making sure that you have counseling available, that you're checking in on them, and even when they say, I'm okay and I don't need anything, those are usually the ones you're going to have to talk to further.